December 6, 1939, minus 43 degrees Celsius, Kala River, Finnish Karelia. The snow squeaked under Lieutenant Simo Haya's boots as he moved through the pine forest, his Mosin Nagant M2830 rifle wrapped in white cloth strips torn from bedsheets. Behind him, 32 men of the Finnish 6th Division's 34th Infantry Regiment prepared defensive positions along a 4-kilometer front. Across the frozen river, 12,000 Soviet soldiers of the 18th Rifle Division were massing for another assault. The mathematics seemed absurd. 32 Finnish farmers, loggers, and shopkeepers against an entire Soviet division equipped with artillery, tanks, and unlimited ammunition. Soviet commanders expected to break through in hours. They would be fighting at Kala for 105 days. What those Soviet officers couldn't know, what they would learn through 105 days of slaughter, was that they faced a man who had spent his life perfecting skills that most soldiers never develop. Simo Haya was a 34-year-old farmer from Rautjärvi who had never attended a military academy, never studied military tactics, never fired a shot in anger before 1939. His training ground had been the forests around his farm. His instructors had been rabbits, foxes, and the occasional wolf. His crazy trick would be dismissed by Soviet officers as peasant luck, by Red Army snipers as impossible exaggeration, and by military theorists as incompatible with modern warfare. Within 100 days, that trick would account for 505 confirmed Soviet dead. By war's end, it would force the Red Army to completely revise its approach to infantry combat and create specialized counter-sniper doctrine that would be used for the next 50 years. This is the story of how patience defeated technology, how simplicity conquered doctrine, and how Soviet confidence turned to terror as their soldiers began refusing to advance across open ground. One man, iron sights, 505 kills. The deadliest sniper in military history. The Soviet invasion of Finland began on November 30, 1939, with supreme confidence. Stalin had ordered the Red Army to conquer Finland in 2 weeks. Marshal Voroshilov had assembled 450,000 troops, 2,000 tanks, and 3,800 aircraft against Finland's 180,000 defenders. The Finnish army, equipped with outdated weapons and lacking tanks or modern aircraft, seemed destined for rapid defeat. Soviet propaganda called it a liberation. Pravda ran headlines promising that Finnish workers would welcome their Soviet comrades with flowers. Political commissars told their troops that Helsinki would fall before Christmas. The Red Army's combat manual described the Finns as primitive forest dwellers lacking military capability or modern training. What Soviet planners failed to understand was that those primitive forest dwellers had been preparing for exactly this war for their entire lives. Finland's geography, endless forests, frozen lakes, limited roads, favored defenders who knew the terrain intimately. Every Finnish man completed military service and received yearly refresher training. Most importantly, Finnish culture emphasized marksmanship. Shooting clubs existed in every village. Hunting was both subsistence and sport. The average Finnish soldier entering the Winter War had been shooting since childhood. Simo Haya exemplified this Finnish tradition. Born in 1905 in the village of Rautjärvi, he had learned to shoot at age 7 using his father's hunting rifle. By age 12, he was putting meat on the family table. By 20, he was winning local shooting competitions with borrowed weapons and hand-loaded ammunition he couldn't afford to waste. His military service from 1925 to 1927 was unremarkable. He qualified as marksman, performed his duties adequately, and returned to farming. But unlike most conscripts who forgot their training, Haya continued shooting. Every week, he walked the forests around his farm, practicing the skills that would make him legend. He shot in all weather conditions: rain, snow, midnight darkness, noon glare. He practiced maintaining steady breathing in sub-zero temperatures. He learned to read wind by watching pine needles and snow dust. He developed the ability to remain motionless for hours, a skill that would prove more valuable than marksmanship itself. Most critically, he refined a technique that professional marksmen dismissed as obsolete. Haiha used iron sights exclusively, refusing the telescopic sights that every military in the world considered standard equipment for snipers. His reasoning was simple and practical. Telescopic sights were 30 centimeters long, requiring the shooter to raise his head higher over cover. The lenses could fog in cold weather or reflect sunlight, giving away position. The mechanisms could freeze or break. Iron sights had none of these problems. This decision would be called foolish by Soviet snipers equipped with 4x PE and PU scopes. They couldn't imagine achieving accuracy beyond 300 meters without optical magnification. Haiha would prove them wrong 505 times. When mobilization orders arrived on November 17, 1939, Haiha reported to his unit carrying his personal Mosin Nagant M2830, a Finnish modified version of the Russian rifle. The weapon was not standard military issue. It featured improved sights, better trigger, and most importantly, a barrel that Haiha knew intimately. He had fired thousands of rounds through it, learning exactly where each shot would strike at every range in every condition. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Juutalainen, assessed his new troops with resignation. They were farmers, not soldiers. Most were over 30, none had combat experience. They would be defending against a Soviet division with 100 times their numbers. Survival seemed unlikely. Then Juutalainen watched Haiha shoot. At 150 meters, 5 shots in a group smaller than a man's fist. At 300 meters, 10 shots that would have killed 10 men. At 400 meters, beyond the effective range of standard infantry rifles, Haiha placed 3 rounds through a dinner plate-sized target. The lieutenant asked him how he maintained such accuracy. Haiha's response became famous in Finnish military circles. Practice, just practice. The defensive position at Kola was simultaneously perfect and terrible. Perfect because dense forest and rugged terrain channeled Soviet attacks into predictable corridors. Terrible because those same features meant Finnish defenders were vastly outnumbered at every point of contact. Soviet doctrine emphasized overwhelming firepower and mass assault. Finnish doctrine, by necessity, emphasized making every shot count. Haiha was assigned forward positions 50 to 150 meters from Soviet lines. His mission was simple: kill officers, NCOs, machine gunners, and anyone who appeared to be giving orders or coordinating attacks. Slow the Soviet advance, break their momentum, make them afraid to move during daylight. On December 6, 1939, Soviet commanders ordered a probing attack across the Kola River. 120 infantry supported by 2 tanks would test Finnish defenses before the main assault. The soldiers advanced at 0630 hours in parade ground formation, rifles at shoulder arms, officers visible with binoculars and map cases. Haiha had been in position since 0430 hours, lying in a snow-covered depression 75 meters from the river. His white camouflage made him invisible against the snow. His position provided clear fields of fire across the river crossing. He had calculated the range to 3 landmarks, memorized the wind direction, and filled his mouth with snow to prevent his breath from condensing in the cold air and giving away his position. The Soviet lieutenant leading the attack was 22 years old, freshly commissioned from officer school, and convinced that Finnish resistance would collapse when faced with Soviet determination. He was shouting encouragement to his men when Haiha's first shot struck him in the chest at 0633 hours. The lieutenant fell without making a sound. Confusion rippled through the Soviet ranks. The attacking force stopped, looking for the source of the shot. Officers shouted contradictory orders. NCOs tried to restore formation. Haiha fired again. A sergeant fell. Then another. Then a soldier raised his rifle toward the Finnish positions. 4 shots. 4 dead, 12 seconds. The Soviet attack dissolved into chaos. Men threw themselves flat in the snow. Others ran back toward their starting positions. A young commissar tried to rally them, waving his pistol and screaming about cowardice in the glory of the Soviet Union. Haiha shot him at 0635 hours. The entire engagement lasted 4 minutes. 5 Soviet soldiers dead, 0 Finnish casualties. The survivors reported being attacked by an entire company of Finnish snipers firing from concealed positions throughout the forest. Soviet intelligence dismissed this as panic and exaggeration. No single sniper could achieve that rate of accurate fire. They were wrong. Haiha had demonstrated what would become his signature technique: rapid, precise fire from a static position followed by immediate relocation. He never fired more than 5 shots from one location. After each engagement, he would slide backwards into deeper cover, move 20 to 30 meters, and establish a new firing position. Soviet return fire would impact where he had been, never where he was. By December 15th, Haiha had killed 37 Soviet soldiers in 9 days of combat. His commanders began noticing a pattern in Soviet behavior. Attacking forces moved cautiously, keeping to cover, avoiding open ground. Officers stayed behind their troops instead of leading from the front. Units would halt and wait for artillery support rather than advancing immediately. The Red Army was learning to fear the forests. Soviet response was predictable and brutal. When snipers couldn't be located and killed, artillery would destroy entire sections of forest. Katyusha rocket batteries would saturate suspected sniper positions with hundreds of rockets. Tanks would advance, firing machine guns randomly into tree lines. The Soviets were spending thousands of rounds and dozens of artillery shells to kill snipers that might not even be there. This was exactly what Finnish strategy required. Every artillery shell wasted on empty forest was one less shell hitting Finnish positions. Every hour Soviet forces spent searching for snipers was one more hour Finnish reinforcements had to prepare defenses. Haiha wasn't just killing Soviet soldiers, he was consuming Soviet resources and destroying Soviet momentum. The technique he used would later be called battlefield economy of force. One man with one rifle was tying down hundreds of enemy soldiers and massive amounts of firepower. The mathematics were stark. If Haiha killed 1 Soviet soldier per day, he prevented 50 others from advancing because they were searching for him or were too afraid to move. His actual kill rate was far higher. By December 22nd, Finnish intelligence intercepted Soviet radio traffic specifically mentioning the White Death operating at Kola. Soviet units were refusing to attack certain sectors without overwhelming artillery preparation first. Commissars were threatening soldiers with summary execution for cowardice. Still, the attacks came slower, more cautious, bleeding Soviet strength through delay as much as casualties. The technology gap was immense. Soviet snipers were equipped with Mosin-Nagant rifles fitted with 4xPE telescopic sights. These scopes provided magnification and theoretical accuracy advantages over iron sights. Soviet snipers trained at specialized schools, learning range estimation, wind reading, and camouflage. Many had combat experience in the Spanish Civil War or border conflicts with Japan. Haiha had none of these advantages. His rifle was functionally identical to what Soviet infantry carried. His training came from hunting animals. His scope was his own eyes, corrected by thick glasses he wore under his helmet. Yet he was killing Soviet soldiers at a rate that seemed impossible. The explanation was brutally simple. Haiha understood something that military doctrine often ignores. Fieldcraft matters more than equipment. The best scope in the world is useless if the enemy sees you first. The most accurate rifle ever built won't help if you're dead before you can fire. Haiha's positions were works of art in minimalist efficiency. He would arrive hours before dawn, moving with glacial slowness to avoid disturbing snow or breaking frozen twigs. He selected positions with multiple escape routes, clear fields of fire, and natural camouflage. He would pack snow in front of his position to prevent muzzle blast from disturbing loose snow and creating a visible puff that would give away his location. He kept his profile minimal, often shooting from prone positions that left only his eyes and rifle visible above the snow line. He controlled his breathing to prevent visible vapor clouds. He timed his shots to coincide with Soviet gunfire or other battlefield noise. Every detail was calculated to make him invisible. Soviet counter-sniper teams struggled with these tactics. They were trained to look for scope glint, for positions elevated above ground level, for signs of disturbed terrain. Hai-Ha provided none of these indicators. He was shooting from ground-level positions using iron sights, moving constantly, leaving minimal trace. Soviet snipers equipped with superior optics were being killed by a man using equipment they considered obsolete. Senior Lieutenant Yevgeny Nikolaev, commanding a Soviet sniper platoon, encountered Hai-Ha's tactics in late December. His after-action report, captured by Finnish forces after the war, described the frustration. "We know a Finnish sniper is operating in Sector 7B. Our casualties confirm his presence. But we cannot locate him. We have observed the sector for 6 hours with optical equipment. No movement detected. No muzzle flash observed. No scope reflection. We requested an artillery strike on suspected positions. Artillery expended 200 rounds. The Finnish sniper killed 2 of our men the following day from the same sector. He is either superhuman or we are facing multiple snipers working in perfect coordination." They were facing one farmer who understood that patience beats technology. Hai-Ha would wait for hours without moving, watching Soviet positions, learning their patterns. He memorized when soldiers lit cigarettes, when they emerged to relieve themselves, when officers made their rounds. He studied how they moved, where they felt safe, what routines they followed. Then he would exploit that knowledge with single, perfectly placed shots. On December 27, 1939, a Soviet major named Konstantin Volkov arrived at Kala with a specialized mission. Volkov was a decorated sniper with 47 confirmed kills from the Spanish Civil War. He had been training Soviet snipers at a school near Moscow when he received orders to eliminate the White Death at Kala. He arrived with a hand-picked team of 6 snipers, all equipped with the finest rifles and optics available to the Red Army. Volkov studied intelligence reports on the Finnish sniper. The kill patterns suggested someone with supernatural awareness and impossible speed. Volkov didn't believe in the supernatural. He believed in careful stalking, superior positions, and professional training. He would find this Finnish peasant and end the myth. He established observation posts with overlapping fields of fire. His team would watch suspected sniper positions in shifts, ready to triangulate the location the moment the Finnish sniper fired. When they found him, they would destroy him with concentrated fire. Standard counter-sniper doctrine executed by professionals. On December 29th, Hai-Ha killed 2 Soviet soldiers crossing open ground near the river. Volkov's team observed the shots, noted the approximate direction, and began systematic observation of a 200-meter section of forest. They saw nothing. No movement, no disturbance, no indication anyone was there. Volkov decided the Finnish sniper must have withdrawn. He ordered a patrol to advance and occupy the suspected position. At 14:15 hours, 6 Soviet soldiers began moving through the forest, rifles ready, moving cautiously from cover to cover. They were 40 meters from Hai-Ha's position when he fired his first shot. The lead soldier fell with a bullet through his heart. The others hit the ground, returning fire at the muzzle flash. Volkov watched through his scope, waiting for the Finnish sniper to reveal himself with a second shot. Hyha fired 4 more times in 6 seconds. 4 more Soviet soldiers died. Then, silence. Volkov's remaining 2 snipers poured fire into the area where the shots originated. 70 rounds in 30 seconds, saturating the suspected position. When they stopped to reload, Volkov examined the area through his scope. No movement, no return fire. He ordered his men to cease fire and wait. They waited until dark. No movement, no additional shots. When Soviet forces finally advanced to investigate the position at dawn the next day, they found a shallow depression in the snow, some scuff marks, and 5 spent cartridges neatly arranged in a row. Hyha had left them as a message. The Finnish sniper had been 40 meters away during the entire exchange, had killed 5 men, and had disappeared without a trace. Volkov's report to his commanders was honest and professional. The Finnish sniper displays field skills beyond anything encountered in previous combat. He is not using standard sniper tactics. He operates from extreme forward positions at ranges where he should be easily visible. He fires from ground level rather than seeking elevated positions. He uses no telescopic sight, yet his accuracy and speed are exceptional. Assessment: extremely dangerous. Recommend withdrawal from sector or massive artillery preparation before any ground operations. The recommendation was rejected. The Red Army did not retreat from Finnish peasants. Political officers reminded everyone that Soviet forces outnumbered the Finns by orders of magnitude. Volkov was ordered to continue his mission. He was killed on January 3, 1940, by a single shot at approximately 320 meters. Hyha had been lying in the same position for 4 hours, waiting for someone to present a worthwhile target. January 1940 brought temperatures below -40 degrees Celsius. Soviet soldiers, many from Ukraine and southern Russia, suffered terribly. Frostbite caused more casualties than Finnish bullets. Supply lines struggled to deliver adequate winter clothing. Morale deteriorated as the promised quick victory turned into frozen misery. Hyha thrived in these conditions. He was Finnish, born and raised in climate that would kill unprepared outsiders. He knew how to layer clothing for warmth without restricting movement. He understood how to prevent metal from freezing to skin, how to keep rifle actions functional in extreme cold, how to spot frostbite symptoms before they became crippling. The weather was his ally. He also understood the psychology of cold. Soldiers suffering from cold exposure make mistakes. They huddle together for warmth, creating target-rich groups. They expose themselves to fires for brief moments of warmth. They take risks they wouldn't take in comfortable conditions, desperately seeking shelter or hot food. Hyha exploited every mistake. On January 7, 1940, Soviet forces attempted a night attack, hoping darkness would protect them from Finnish snipers. The attack began at 0200 hours with an artillery barrage, followed by an infantry assault at 0230 hours. Soviet planners assumed Finnish snipers wouldn't be able to operate effectively in darkness. Hyha had been in position since 2300 hours the previous evening. He couldn't see his targets clearly, but he could see their movements silhouetted against the snow. More importantly, he could see muzzle flashes and hear commands being shouted. He fired at sounds and shadows, trusting instinct developed through thousands of hours in dark forests hunting animals. He killed 7 Soviet soldiers that night. None of his targets ever saw him. None knew where the shots came from. By 0300 hours, the Soviet attack had stalled, as soldiers refused to advance into the darkness where invisible death waited. They fired wildly into the forest, wasting ammunition on ghosts. Hyha was 80 meters away, completely still, letting panic do his work for him. By January 15, 1940, Simo Häyhä had killed 219 Soviet soldiers in 46 days of combat. Soviet commanders were receiving reports from multiple sectors about devastating sniper casualties. The psychological impact was far larger than the actual numbers. Soviet infantry were terrified of Finnish snipers, real or imagined. They moved cautiously, wasted time seeking cover, and demanded artillery support before advancing. The Red Army's momentum was bleeding away into paranoia. Finnish commanders understood what they had in Häyhä. He wasn't just a sniper, he was psychological warfare embodied. Every Soviet soldier killed was a message to hundreds of others. You are not safe. The forest watches. Death comes without warning. This demoralization was worth more than a company of machine guns. But Häyhä never saw himself as special. When asked about his kills, his responses were matter-of-fact. I aimed, I fired, they fell. When questioned about how he achieved such accuracy, he would shrug. Practice and patience, nothing more. When Soviet prisoners asked about the legendary White Death, Häyhä was dismissive. I'm just doing my job. This humility concealed extraordinary discipline. Häyhä lived by rules he had developed through a decade of hunting. Never fire unless you're certain of the target. Never fire unless you have an escape route planned. Never fire more than 5 shots from one position. Never stay in the open longer than necessary. Never assume the enemy is stupid. These rules kept him alive. Other Finnish snipers, emboldened by early success, became careless. They fired from exposed positions. They stayed in one location too long. They underestimated Soviet reaction time. Many were killed by artillery, by counter-snipers, or by infantry assaults that overran their positions. Häyhä survived because he never forgot that rules were written in blood. On January 26, 1940, Soviet forces launched their largest offensive at Kola. 3 regiments with tank support, preceded by 8-hour artillery barrage. The objective was to break Finnish defenses through overwhelming force. Finnish defenders were outnumbered 40-1 at the point of attack. Häyhä was positioned 100 meters behind the main defensive line, tasked with targeting officers and tank commanders. The Soviet attack began at 0600 hours with artillery fire that turned the forest into hell. Finnish positions were shredded by high explosive shells. Trees were splintered into lethal splinters. The ground shook continuously. At 1400 hours, the artillery lifted and Soviet infantry advanced. Häyhä began firing at 1402 hours, targeting tank commanders exposed in their hatches. His first shot killed a lieutenant commanding a T-26 tank. The tank continued forward, but without coordination from the commander, it became separated from infantry support. Finnish anti-tank teams destroyed it with Molotov cocktails. Häyhä shifted targets to infantry officers. His second shot killed a captain shouting orders. His third killed a commissar waving a pistol. His fourth killed a senior sergeant trying to rally troops. By 1408 hours, he had fired 11 shots and killed 9 men. Soviet attack momentum stalled as soldiers sought cover, looking for the source of the deadly accurate fire. Soviet artillery observers spotted muzzle flash from Häyhä's general position. They called in fire mission. At 1412 hours, a barrage of 122mm shells began impacting the area where Häyhä had been shooting. He was already gone, having moved immediately after his 11th shot. The artillery destroyed empty forest. The attack continued until 1800 hours before being driven back with heavy losses. Finnish casualties were severe, 12 men killed, 34 wounded, but the Soviet attack, which should have broken through undermanned Finnish positions in hours, had been stopped. Officers reported that coordinated Soviet attack patterns fell apart under sniper fire that targeted leadership systematically. Units advanced, then stopped when commanders were killed. Tank-infantry coordination dissolved. The attack became a disorganized mass assault easily defeated by prepared defenses. Heiha's contribution was 19 confirmed kills that day, but his real impact was tactical disruption. He had killed enough officers and NCOs to break Soviet command structure at critical moments. This force multiplication, one rifleman affecting the behavior of entire battalions, was the essence of effective sniping. By February 1, 1940, Simo Heiha had killed 302 Soviet soldiers in 63 days of combat. Soviet commanders were desperate to eliminate him. They couldn't pull back, Stalin would have them shot for cowardice. They couldn't advance, Finnish defenses hadn't broken despite overwhelming force. They were trapped in a grinding attrition battle where every attack cost hundreds of casualties. The bounty on Heiha's head grew. Soviet officers offered decorations, promotions, and extended leave to anyone who killed the White Death. Counter-sniper teams were reinforced. Artillery strikes on suspected positions became routine. Entire sections of forest were destroyed by bombardment based on speculation about where Heiha might be operating. Nothing worked. Heiha continued killing Soviet soldiers with mechanical regularity. His techniques remained simple: arrive early, find an excellent position, wait for targets, shoot accurately, and leave immediately. Soviet forces couldn't counter tactics that relied on patience and discipline rather than technology or complex maneuvers. On February 17, 1940, Soviet commanders decided on a different approach. If they couldn't find the Finnish sniper, they would make him irrelevant through overwhelming force. An entire division would attack at Kola, supported by maximum artillery and air support. Finnish defenses would be obliterated by sheer firepower. Individual snipers would be buried under the rubble. The offensive began at 0800 hours on February 19th with the largest artillery barrage of the Winter War. Soviet guns fired continuously for 4 hours, dropping 15,000 shells on Finnish positions. The forest was reduced to splinters. Finnish casualties were catastrophic. Defensive positions were destroyed. Communication lines were cut. The Finnish line at Kola was on the verge of collapse. At 1200 hours, Soviet infantry advanced. They moved in mass formations, accepting heavy casualties as the price of breakthrough. Finnish machine guns killed hundreds. Artillery decimated entire companies, but Soviet forces kept coming, trampling over their dead, pushing through hell toward Finnish positions. Heiha was operating 150 meters ahead of the shattered Finnish main line. His position had survived the barrage by luck. A shell had landed 8 meters away, but the frozen ground had absorbed most of the blast. He was partially buried in snow and debris, his ears ringing from a concussion, but his rifle was undamaged. He began firing at 12:03 hours. Soviet officers were easy targets, advancing in front of their men, waving arms, shouting encouragement. Heiha killed 4 in the first 30 seconds. The Soviet advance continued, too many attackers, too much momentum to stop. He shifted targets to machine gun crews, the soldiers carrying heavy weapons that would make Finnish positions untenable. 3 machine gunners fell before their weapons could be deployed. For 12 minutes, Heiha fired as fast as he could operate the bolt and acquire targets. 27 shots, 23 confirmed kills. Soviet officers afterwards reported facing withering fire from multiple hidden positions. They were being killed by one man with an obsolete rifle and iron sights. At 12:15 hours, Heiha withdrew. His position was about to be overrun. He moved through the forest at a speed that should have been impossible for someone who had been lying prone for hours. He knew every tree, every path, every covered route. He reached Finnish secondary positions as the first Soviet soldiers entered the forest where he'd been shooting. They found empty snow and spent cartridges. The Soviet offensive captured 300 meters of forest at a cost of 1,400 casualties. By nightfall, Finnish counterattacks had retaken 200 meters of that ground. The breakthrough had accomplished nothing except proving that even overwhelming force couldn't guarantee success against defenders who refused to break. On February 21, 1940, Soviet intelligence intercepted transmissions indicating that specific units had been tasked with killing the Finnish sniper at coordinate Sector 12. Transmissions described detailed plans involving multiple counter-sniper teams, artillery support, and infantry sweeps. Soviet command was committing significant resources to eliminate one man. Haiha's response was to change his patterns. He began operating from different sectors, never establishing predictable routines. He would work one area for a day, then move to a completely different sector 2 kilometers away. Soviet forces preparing to hunt him in one location would discover he was killing their comrades elsewhere. This unpredictability multiplied his effectiveness. Soviet commanders had to assume the White Death could appear anywhere along their entire front. They couldn't concentrate counter-sniper forces because they didn't know where to look. Every sector became dangerous. Every attack had to account for the possibility that Haiha was watching, waiting for them to expose themselves. The psychological toll was measurable. Soviet units at Kola had casualty rates 3 times higher than Soviet forces fighting in other sectors against similar Finnish defenses. Soviet intelligence analysts attributed this to exceptional sniper activity and resulting infantry paralysis. Soldiers were so afraid of snipers that they moved slowly, bunched together for psychological comfort, and demanded excessive fire support before advancing. All of these behaviors increased casualties and decreased combat effectiveness. On March 2, 1940, a Soviet artillery spotter named Ivan Sidorenko was observing Finnish positions through a trench periscope. He was 400 meters from Finnish lines, inside a reinforced observation bunker, protected by overhead cover and frontal armor. Standard doctrine said he was safe from rifle fire at that range and protection. At 12:47 hours, Simo Haiha fired a single shot from 387 meters. The bullet entered the periscope's viewing slit, struck Sidorenko in the eye, and killed him instantly. The shot shouldn't have been possible. The viewing slit was 3 centimeters tall and 40 centimeters wide. The angle was severe. The range was extreme for iron sights, yet Haiha had threaded that impossible shot on his first attempt. Soviet soldiers who witnessed this refused to use the observation post afterward. They reported that the Finnish sniper could shoot through any opening, no matter how small or distant. The story spread throughout Soviet lines. The White Death wasn't just accurate, he was supernatural. He could see through bunkers, he could shoot around corners. He never missed. None of this was true. Haiha had simply been watching the bunker for 2 days, noting the pattern of observation activity. He had calculated the precise range using landmarks. He had estimated the wind. He had waited for a moment of perfect stillness. Then he had taken a shot that 99.9% of marksmen would consider impossible. He made it look easy because he had spent a decade in the forest learning exactly how difficult it actually was. By March 6, 1940, Simo Haiha had killed 505 Soviet soldiers in 98 days of combat. His confirmed kill count exceeded any other sniper in military history to that date. Soviet forces at Kola had suffered over 4,000 casualties fighting against Finnish defenders who never numbered more than 400 at any point. The kill ratio was unprecedented. Finnish commanders privately credited Haiha with preventing a Soviet breakthrough by demoralizing attacking forces to the point of combat ineffectiveness. But numbers don't convey the full impact. Haha had proven that individual marksmanship combined with superior fieldcraft could dominate entire battlefields. He had demonstrated that technology advantages, telescopic sights, numerical superiority, overwhelming firepower, meant nothing against an opponent who refused to be found and killed with mechanical precision when targets presented themselves. Soviet military analysts studying the Kola sector couldn't understand how Finnish defenders held against forces that should have annihilated them. The official explanation credited terrain advantages and fanatical resistance. The truth was simpler and more frightening. They were fighting an enemy who understood their own ground better than Soviet forces understood their tactics. They were being killed by farmers and loggers who had spent their lives in forests, who could disappear into terrain that Soviet soldiers saw as uniform wilderness. On March 6, 1940, at approximately 1500 hours, Soviet forces launched a probing attack near Haha's position. Artillery preparation was light. Soviet forces were running low on shells after months of continuous bombardment. The attacking force consisted of approximately 40 infantrymen moving cautiously through snow-covered forest. Haha was in position 80 meters from their route of advance. He had been there since 0900 hours, wading through 6 hours of cold and cramping muscles for a worthwhile target. Soviet tactics had adapted since December. They no longer bunched together. They used scouts. They advanced in rushes between cover. Getting clean shots required exceptional patience. At 1517 hours, a Soviet soldier raised his head above a snowbank to observe Finnish positions. Haha fired. The soldier fell. Soviet forces immediately went to ground and began suppressive fire in the direction of the shot. Haha had anticipated this. He was already moving, sliding backwards into a depression that concealed him from Soviet observers. What happened next remains unclear. Soviet records indicate that their forces were ordered to use indirect fire to target the suspected sniper position. An exploding artillery shell landed approximately 3 to 5 meters from where Haha had been lying. Other reports suggest a Soviet soldier fired an explosive bullet, prohibited by international law but used by both sides, that detonated close to Haha's face. The blast threw Haha backwards. Shrapnel tore through the left side of his face, shattering his jaw, destroying multiple teeth, and exiting through his left cheek. The wound was catastrophic. His entire lower face was destroyed. He lost consciousness immediately. Finnish soldiers found him at 1700 hours during a patrol. He was barely breathing, his face a mass of frozen blood and shattered bone. They evacuated him to a field hospital where surgeons worked through the night to save his life. The prognosis was grim. The jaw damage was so severe that doctors expected him to die from blood loss or infection within 48 hours. Simo Haha woke from a coma on March 13, 1940, the day the Winter War ended. The Soviets and Finns had signed an armistice. Finland had lost 11% of its territory but maintained independence. The Red Army had suffered 150,000 casualties, far more than Finland's entire army. Stalin's promised 2-week conquest had taken 105 days and cost the Soviet Union international prestige, military credibility, and the lives of tens of thousands of soldiers. Simo Haha's jaw was reconstructed through multiple surgeries. He would never look the same. His left cheek remained partially collapsed. His speech was affected, but he survived. And by surviving, he became a legend. Soviet military analysis of the Winter War was brutal and honest. The Red Army had demonstrated catastrophic incompetence at every level. Stalin's purges had eliminated experienced officers, leaving the army led by political commissars who knew nothing about warfare. Equipment was inadequate for winter operations, tactics were outdated, morale was terrible. The Finnish victory was less about Finnish superiority than about Soviet dysfunction. But one aspect of Finnish operations received serious study. The effectiveness of Finnish snipers, particularly the sniper known as the White Death, had demonstrated that individual marksmanship could still matter in modern warfare. Soviet military schools began emphasizing sniper training. Counter-sniper doctrine was developed. By 1941, when Germany invaded, the Red Army had established dedicated sniper units and training programs that would produce some of the most effective snipers of World War II. This was Simo Häyhä's lasting impact. He didn't just kill 505 Soviet soldiers, he forced the Red Army to completely rethink infantry tactics. Soviet snipers like Vasily Zaitsev and Lyudmila Pavlichenko would later use refined versions of techniques developed to counter what Häyhä had done. The Germans would face Soviet sniper tactics at Stalingrad that were direct responses to lessons learned fighting Finnish snipers at Kola. After the war, Häyhä returned to farming. He never spoke extensively about his service. When reporters asked about his kills, he was dismissive. "I did what I had to do." When military historians requested interviews, he declined. "I was a soldier. I did my duty. Nothing more to say." He lived until 1992, dying at age 96. In his later years, he occasionally met with military personnel who wanted to understand his techniques. His advice was always the same: practice constantly, know your weapon, know your ground, be patient, don't take unnecessary risks. In 1998, a Russian veteran who had fought at Kola traveled to Finland specifically to meet Häyhä. The veteran, whose name was not recorded, had been wounded in the leg during the Winter War and had spent decades wondering about the Finnish sniper who had terrified his unit. When they met, the Russian asked Häyhä how he had achieved such accuracy with iron sights. Häyhä's response was characteristically simple: "The rifle is accurate. I just held it steady." The Russian veteran later told reporters, "I expected to meet a monster. I met a farmer, a quiet man who spoke little. He didn't boast. He didn't seem proud. He seemed tired, like a man who had done a hard job well and wanted to forget about it. That made him more frightening somehow. He killed 500 men and felt nothing, just work that needed doing." This assessment misunderstood Häyhä. He felt everything: the nightmares, the guilt, the weight of lives taken. But he was Finnish. Showing emotion was a weakness, so he remained silent, letting others make him into whatever legend they needed. At the Kola Museum in Finland, there's a display dedicated to the Winter War. Among the exhibits is Häyhä's rifle, the Mosin Nagant M28-30 he used to kill 505 Soviet soldiers. Visitors examine the weapon, looking for something special, some modification or feature that explains its success. They find nothing. It's a standard rifle, well-maintained but unremarkable. Next to the rifle is a quote from Häyhä, given in one of his rare interviews in 1997. "People ask about my trick. There was no trick. I practiced shooting every week for 20 years. When war came, I already knew how to shoot. That's all." But that wasn't all. The trick was psychological as much as technical. Häyhä understood that fear was a weapon more powerful than bullets. Every Soviet soldier he killed sent a message to hundreds of others: nowhere is safe. The forest is watching. Death comes without warning. This psychological warfare broke Soviet morale and combat effectiveness more thoroughly than any direct combat action could have achieved. Soviet casualties at Kola totaled 4,358 killed out of approximately 12,000 engaged. Finnish casualties were 302 killed out of approximately 400 defenders. The kill ratio of 14-1 exceeded any other defensive action of the Winter War. Finnish commanders attributed it to superior defensive positions, better knowledge of terrain, and higher morale. All true, but Soviet veterans attributed it to something simpler and more terrifying: the White Death and the dozens of other Finnish snipers who made advancing across open ground suicidal. The mathematics of Haiha's impact extend beyond his 505 confirmed kills. Every Soviet attack that was delayed, every unit that demanded artillery support before moving, every soldier who stayed in cover instead of advancing, these multiplied his effectiveness exponentially. One man with one rifle had affected the behavior of an entire Soviet division. The force multiplication factor was literally incalculable. Modern military doctrine acknowledges this principle. Elite snipers aren't valued only for their kill counts, they're valued for their ability to disrupt enemy operations, destroy morale, and force enemies to change tactics. One sniper in the right position at the right time can halt an entire offensive. Haiha proved this at Kola. The lesson was learned by every military force that studied the Winter War. The Soviet Union officially denied that any single Finnish sniper had killed 505 soldiers. Soviet military records from the period contain no mention of the White Death. Political commissars dismissed Finnish claims as propaganda designed to boost morale. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, researchers gained access to previously classified military archives. They found reports, after-action reviews, and intelligence assessments that confirmed everything. The White Death was real. His kill count was accurate. Soviet forces had been terrorized by a Finnish farmer with an unmodified rifle and iron sights. In 2017, the Russian Ministry of Defense published a retrospective analysis of the Winter War. The document, intended for military history purposes, included a section on Finnish sniper tactics. It specifically mentioned Simo Haiha and credited him with demonstrating the continued relevance of individual marksmanship in modern combat. This was as close as the Russian government would ever come to acknowledging that one Finnish farmer had killed 505 Soviet soldiers and forced the Red Army to completely revise their tactical doctrine. At the Finnish National Defense University, Haiha's techniques are still taught to reconnaissance and sniper students. The emphasis is on his fundamentals: know your weapon, know your ground, be patient, be disciplined, never take unnecessary risks. These principles remain valid in an era of thermal optics, laser rangefinders, and computer-calculated ballistics. Technology changes, basic principles don't. The crazy trick that killed 505 Soviets in 100 days wasn't crazy. It was the opposite of crazy. It was systematic application of fundamental skills, practiced obsessively, executed with perfect discipline. It was a farmer who understood that killing wasn't about fancy equipment or complex tactics. It was about putting a bullet exactly where it needed to go, every single time, without hesitation or error. Simo Haiha never claimed to be exceptional. He insisted he was simply a soldier doing his job. But the record speaks differently. 505 confirmed kills in 100 days of combat averages to 5.05 kills per day. This rate has never been matched. His record stands today, 85 years later, as the highest confirmed kill count by any sniper in military history. The Soviet soldiers who died at Kola between December 1939 and March 1940 were buried in mass graves near the battlefield. Their families received letters stating they had died heroically defending the Soviet Union against fascist aggression. The letters didn't mention that many had been killed by a single Finnish farmer who refused to miss. The Finnish soldiers who survived Kola, including Haiha's squad mates, rarely spoke about the war. Finnish culture emphasized stoic silence about difficult things, but in private moments, veterans would acknowledge what they had witnessed. One man, with one rifle, holding off an army. It shouldn't have been possible, yet they had seen it happen, day after day, for 100 days straight. When Simo Haiha died in 2002, his obituary in the Finnish newspaper Helsinki Sanomat was brief. It mentioned his military service, his injuries, his post-war life as a farmer and hunter. It noted that he had been Finland's most successful sniper. The obituary ended with a quote from Heiha himself, given in a 1999 interview when asked how he wanted to be remembered. "I did my duty. That's all anyone should do. No more, no less." At the Hietiniemi Cemetery in Helsinki, Heiha's grave is marked with a simple stone. His name, his birth and death dates, nothing more. No mention of kills, no military decorations listed. Nothing to indicate that the man buried there had killed more enemy soldiers than any other sniper in history. Just a stone in a quiet cemetery, marking the resting place of a farmer who happened to be very, very good at his job. The legacy isn't the kills. The legacy is the lesson. That individual skill still matters, that technology doesn't replace fundamentals, that patience and discipline defeat numbers and equipment, that one person in the right place at the right time can change the course of battles. These lessons remain relevant today. They'll remain relevant as long as human beings fight wars. Soviet commanders at Kola learned these lessons through blood. They sent 12,000 soldiers against 400 Finnish defenders and suffered 4,358 casualties. They committed tanks, artillery, aircraft, and unlimited ammunition against an enemy with almost nothing, and they lost. Not because Finnish technology was better, not because Finnish tactics were more sophisticated, but because Finnish defenders, led by men like Simo Heiha, simply refused to be beaten. The Red Army eventually captured Kola in March 1940, but only after the armistice made continued Finnish defense pointless. Soviet forces inherited a sector that had cost them more casualties than some entire offensives elsewhere. They found defensive positions so well constructed and cleverly situated that Soviet officers used them as examples in training after the war. They found a forest that had been turned into a killing ground, where every approach was covered, every position was protected, every meter had been fought for with blood. What they didn't find was Simo Heiha. He had been evacuated weeks earlier, barely alive, his face destroyed but his record intact. 505 Soviet soldiers killed in 100 days of combat. The crazy trick that wasn't crazy at all, just practice, patience, and the absolute refusal to miss. The White Death, the farmer who became legend, the man who killed 505 Soviets with iron sights and stayed humble. His story endures because it confirms something humans want to believe, that individual excellence still matters, that underdogs can win, that courage and skill can overcome overwhelming odds. In the forests around Kola, veterans sometimes return to walk the old defensive positions. The trenches are still visible, the bunkers remain. The landscape hasn't changed much. And on cold winter mornings, when snow covers everything and the forest is silent, it's easy to imagine a figure in white camouflage, lying perfectly still, waiting with infinite patience for a target to present itself, just doing his duty, nothing more, nothing less.